What's doing, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to one of these mobility series. I'm going to run you through a foam rolling sequence that I recommend to all of my clients and all of you watching. It's something that you should do before a lower body mobility session, but you can also do it before a lower body weightlifting session. Today, we're going to go through how to foam roll our hips, our thighs, or our quads and our adductors. And I know that for a lot of people, those are the areas that are tight and that restrict them when it comes to hip hinge movements. I mean, things like, squats, deadlifts, anything where there's flexion and extension of the hip. So without further ado, I'll get stuck into this sequence. The first thing we're going to go over is going to be the hip. So foam roller starts off in the crease of the hip, like so. So I sit that foam roller into the crease of my hip. What I do is rock back and forth in the same spot, feeling out any tension points. For some of you, you may not feel anything, and that's fine. Just a few rocks back and forth, and so we progress. And what we're going to do is we're going to flex the knee. So when I flex my knee, my heel comes up. When I extend my knee, my heel goes down to the floor. So what I'm going to do is flex and extend my knee, just a few reps, right? I might even oscillate a little bit as I'm flexing and extending. Okay, mobility, as I've said before, is an explorative thing. It's an opportunity for you to acquaint yourself with your body, right? Muscles and joints and areas that you don't typically use. Okay, so once we've done that, then what we do is we flex the knee so our heel is vertical, or our shin is vertical rather. And what we're going to do is drive our heel up to the ceiling. So I'm squeezing that rear glute, I'm squeezing this, and I'm lifting the knee off the ground, and I'm pushing my heel up to the ceiling. And as you do that, you'll find that there's a lot more pressure placed on your hip. The foam roller presses into your hip even harder with more force. So you do that, and whilst that knee is lifted, you might again oscillate back and forth. Right. Okay, so then again, just play around. You might lift the knee, you might flex and extend, you might even extend the hip whilst your leg is straight. Just play around. Once you've done a few of those, we move on to the next part of this, where we internally and externally rotate our thigh. Okay, so what's going to happen is my shin is vertical and it's in the middle, right, or it's straight. What I do is I bring my ankle in, or I pull my shin over to the midline, pull it further away from my midline. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm internally and externally rotating whilst the foam roller is in the crease of my hip. Again, if you find a tight spot, if you find a tension point, camp out there, feel it out. You might externally rotate or you might internally rotate like this, and you might even try to lift that knee off the ground a little bit. You might come all the way in like so, lift the knee off the ground. I know that's tight for me there. There's certainly a tension point. Right, I might even rock back and forth. Once you've done that, we progress to the next thing. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bridge up on one hand. I'm going to flex my knee. And I'm going to use my hands, or I'm going to use my arms and my leg to rock my body back and forth. So there's no movement. My thigh isn't internally and externally rotating. None of this, right? What's happening is I'm using my arms or my base to rotate my body around the foam roller, right? So I'm rolling out to the outer portion of my hip, like so, going in and out. Okay, so play around in these areas. Once you get to that outer part of your hip, you might then rock forward and backward. I know that I'm not getting anything, I'm not getting much there. There's not a lot of tension, so then I might go back towards the center. I know it's tighter there for me. Okay, so the next layer to this is being able to rock your body, go to a certain position. So right now I'm in the end range. I'm at the outermost part of my hip, and now I'm going to internally and externally rotate. So now my body is in a static position and I'm consciously internally and externally rotating my thigh. Okay. And so now I might add it all together. I might rotate a little bit. So I'm rotating my body. The foam roller is rotating around my thigh. And whilst that's happening, I'm internally and externally rotating my thigh. All right, feel it out. Oscillate back and forth. Perfect. Now that we've worked or rolled out that portion of the hip, right, the mid and outer portion of our hip crease, we're going to work down our thigh or the quad. So I start off from the internal. I start off from the crease in the hip. I roll up a couple of centimeters. And what I do is I flex and extend my knee. Okay. Then I roll up a little more. I flex and extend the knee. If you're not feeling much and you need a bit more tension, a bit more pressure, you can then try squeezing that rear glute and lifting that knee off the ground. Okay, and then again, a couple of centimeters up. Flex and extend the knee. Floss through that quad. Keep going. And you work your way all the way to the bottom of your thigh, just above your knee, to about there. Once we get to the bottom, I then use my hands to roll up and down, like so. Once I've done that, I'll start working the outer portion of my thigh. So we've rolled all the way along here, and now we're going to work our way across to the lateral part of our thigh and roll along there. So similar to what I was doing before, foam roller starts off in the crease of my hip. I'll then brace one hand and I'll rest on the elbow of the other. I'll push my body out to the side, and then I start rocking my body from side to side. And from here, what I then do is I roll up a couple of centimeters, or I roll down my thigh rather. And as you can hear or tell, it's a little tender for me. Roll out to that lateral part of my thigh. Roll up a couple more centimeters. And as I'm working my way down, I roll side to side. I roll down, side to side, down, side to side. So it looks a bit like this. Okay, I'm using those arms. Now, once I get to the base of my thigh or towards my knee, just above my knee, I'll then roll all the way back up to my hip and all the way back down. So I'll just play around in this position a few times. Might even straighten that leg. Okay, keep this foot up. So again, it's an explorative thing. Just play around. I know that if I lift my knee off the ground, it puts a lot of pressure on the outer part of my thigh, and it's painful, but I work through it. I work through that discomfort, and I'll work my way back up to the top of my hip. So, to recap, we started off with the hip, we rolled around, then we did the middle of our thigh, then we did the lateral portion of our thigh. So once we've done the hip and the quad, we work our way into the adductors, right, the inner portion of our thighs. Before we move on to the thighs, I should note that I spend 3 minutes on each hip and thigh. So set your timer, 3 minutes. You might spend a minute and a half on the hip, and then on the following minute and a half, remaining minute and a half on the thigh. Once you've done both sides, you can then start on the inner portion of your thighs. I usually spend a minute and a half to 2 minutes on those. So what I'm going to do is change the position of the foam roller like so, and I'm going to position it as close to the crease of my hip as I can, but on the inner side. So what it looks like is this. The foam roller is vertical, it's perpendicular to my thigh, and it's sitting in really, really close or up in my groin. So I lie down, I straighten the other leg, one elbow on the mat, one hand on the floor. From this position, I start rocking back and forth, like so. Right. Now what you can do to apply a little more pressure is lift that knee. If you can, try to lift that knee and rock. Rolls a couple of centimeters across. Start rocking, oscillating back and forth. Feel out those tight areas. A couple centimeters across again. And back and forth. You might want to lift that knee, add a bit more pressure. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Please note that when you're rolling along the inner portion of your thigh, your adductor muscles stop around that halfway mark. If you roll further down than halfway, you actually start rolling the innermost portion of your quadricep or your thigh muscle. You can do that if you like. If you find you harbor a lot of tension in that part of your thigh, you're more than welcome to do it. I typically go halfway, and you can feel the tension shift from your inner thigh to the most medial part of your thigh. So I tend to stop around there. Once I've rolled all the way down to the bottom of my inner thigh or my adductor, I'll then roll all the way up and down a few times. I'll feel out those tight lines. If I find the spot, if I find a tension point, I might camp out there for a little bit. And then from here, as I work my way back up, what I'll do is instead of shifting my body back and forth on the foam roller, I'll shift my knee. So my hip is flexing and extending, right? My knee is coming up and down. I might start flexing and extending my knee. So once again, if the knee comes up and down like so, I'm flexing and extending my hip. If my shin comes in and out, I'm flexing and extending my knee. So I'm not trying to confuse you all with this. If you can't keep up with the terms that I'm using to describe my movements, just remember the positions that I'm in, right? It's a very explorative thing. You can be here, you can be there, you can be up, you can be down, you can lift your knee, you can have it on the floor. Just play around, okay? Move your body, move your leg. If you get a little fancy, you might even start adding a bit of rotation in there. You'll find that hits the top of your thigh, like so. Once again, it is explorative. So play around, feel your body out, and listen to what it's telling you. 2 minutes on either side, and that is a 10-minute sequence. The best way I can describe foam rolling is like adding water to Play-Doh. That's the analogy that was given to me when I came across this. When Play-Doh gets left out, it gets very stiff and dry, and it's difficult to manipulate. So you add water to it, and it makes it more pliable, and you can then start putting it into various shapes more comfortably. The same applies to the muscle in a sense. When we start foam rolling, we work on a lot of these tissues, and we stimulate them. Blood goes into those areas. The muscles become more pliable, more mobile, more lax. And especially when you're doing mobility, it's really, really important that you get blood into the areas because you want to have that laxity in the muscle and the joints so you can push into those end ranges that you don't typically get into. So this foam rolling sequence is super, super important for when you're doing a lower body mobility session. It can be done, particularly in the hips, if you're going to do a lower body session, because what happens is you open up the hips, and there are some mobility sequences and exercises that I'll run through at later stages about what you can do to prime your hips to get ready for some sort of lower body orientated physical activity, whether it be boxing, Muay Thai, judo, or even just weights or even a run. I won't get into the details of how and why. I'll save that for another video. But just remember, this foam rolling sequence is really, really good, really important for mobility. Get around it. If you have any questions, shoot me a message through the Martial Spirit page or directly. So I'll leave it with you. I'll catch you later.